This is Jamie Dyer, and you're listening to the Old Time Review podcast. Absolutely delighted to be joined via the medium of Skype by composer and singer Denis King. I wanted to talk to you today really because there is so much from looking up about you. There's so much that I could ask you, that I could talk to you about. But really, I wanted to ask you today about your TV composing. You're composing for television. Where did that start? Where did you get your start in composing for television?
It was a kind, I was going to say a natural progression. It wasn't. I mean, if you know anything about my upbringing, you'd know it was musical, but in a performing. I was a part of a band or group or brothers. My two brothers and myself had a fairly successful pop group in the 50s, really late 50s and into 60s, into the 60s. But I was the piano player in the group. There was just three of us. There was I played the piano. One of the brothers played the guitar, and the other one played the double bass, and we all sang. And we had, as I say, fairly successful career on performing on television from a very early age. But I was always fascinated by the orchestra, by whatever accompaniment we might have, either playing in theatres or subsequently on records, always accompanied, although we played instruments, always accompanied by an orchestra. Not that I wasn't into orchestration by then. I was still, relatively young. But I was always watching the orchestra and listening to the orchestrations and thinking, wouldn't it be nice to be able to do that and make the strings play this or the trombones play that or whatever it was. So with the advent of the King brothers disbanding due to primarily the potential, really, in terms of what we might achieve, had been exhausted by then because we were up against, the great groups of the time of the 60s. Obviously, the music scene had changed in this country with the Beatles and the Stones and all the bands and all that, and we were rather sort of family entertainment, I suppose. We sang nice songs that were quite quiet and quite, musical. Yes, we were quite musical. I always sort of felt I'd probably feel more comfortable in the background, in the studios. So I decided I needed to learn a bit more about orchestra and orchestration. So when the band broke up in the late 1970 actually, I decided to go back to school. By that I mean it was the Guildhall School of Music to learn about orchestration, which I knew very little about. The biggest orchestra, if you like, I'd ever written for was about 4 musicians. It was myself, the bass player, the drummer, and a guitarist. So I wanted to explore orchestra, and I had a term at the Guildhall under a man called Edmund Rubra, who was a rather he was well known in classical circles as a composer, even though he was very elderly by the time I went to have lessons from him. But he was very patient, very nice man. But I wanted to kind of cut the corners. I didn't feel I wanted to go back to square one. I knew a little bit about orchestra, but not enough. So it didn't really work out at the Guildhall, although it always looks good on one's CV to say, oh yes, I studied at the Guildhall, which I sort of did, but didn't learn very much. But I got a break through contacts. It's like, I suppose, most things, particularly in the entertainment business. I befriended a man at London Weekend Television when I was performing with my brothers. He was the head of music, a man called Harry Rabinowitz, who was a wonderful character, conductor, arranger, whatever. He, through my music publisher, who told me about a television series about a horse called Black Beauty. And in the meantime, I've been writing little themes for sitcom bits and pieces, most of which were rejected. But occasionally I've got something on, like just a little catchy little tune, which I orchestrated for 6 or 7 musicians. But so my music publisher said there's this series called Black Beauty. He said it would be a great one to to at least submit an idea for, because it could be very successful. So I did. I wrote a theme on the piano. I always worked with the piano, and put it on a tape, and sent it in to London Weekend to my contact Harry Rabinowitz, and he said, "I better tell you, you're up against 15 other composers. They're all submitting ideas for the theme for the series, because they, quite rightly think it might be a very commercial business, because it's a children's series. It's going to run for 2 seasons, so it's worthwhile." Anyway, I wrote my piece, and I put it on a tape on piano, sent it in, and Harry called me back about a week or so later to say that they had cut down from the 15 or 16 submissions to 8, and you're in the 8. And then a week or two later, you're in the last 4. It was quite exciting. It's like the Eurovision Song Contest. And they said, "You're in the final." And he said, "You're in the final 2." And I thought, oh, gosh. And as it happened, next phone call was, "Congratulations, the producers have chosen your theme." So I said, "Oh, that's wonderful." He said, "The thing is, there's a bit of a deadline, because they're already mapping out the series, and they need the music pretty soon." I mean, the brief I was given for writing the theme was, I knew obviously that Black Beauty was about a horse, and they said, we want a big open air sort of theme, and I remember the quote, "like the Virginian," which was a Western series at the time, American cover, like the Virginian, but not American. This is very curious. Oh yeah, sort of a British Western, if you like, theme. So, as Harry said, we need to record very urgently, because they want to start filming the opening sequence, and they want to film the sequence to the music. So I really was fairly desperate in a way, because I wasn't experienced at all in writing for orchestra, as I said before. So I kind of got a couple of books out of I knew, that was the other thing they said. There's a big orchestra already booked in the studios to record what was then, it was Tommy Steele's special they were going to do, and they had this orchestra book with strings and woodwinds and horns and a 12-piece choir on a Saturday at the studios then in Wembley, and you have a kind of less than a week to come up with the arrangement. So it was such a great opportunity to have this orchestra of about 40 musicians. And I had the theme, but I didn't know how to orchestrate it. So I kind of called on various. I got a book which was given to me, which I still have. It's like a Bible for me as far as orchestration, called "Sounds and Scores" by Henry Mancini. And it was given to me by my very good friend at the time, who also helped me when I was really struggling with the orchestra, was Dudley Moore, I lived in Hampstead in London at the time, and he lived in Hampstead. We knew each other sort of socially, actually. I've known him for quite a while, and he was very helpful, and he came over to my house, and when I was going through, writing the dots down, he said, "Oh, you can't, the woodwind, whatever the instrument was." He said, the horns can't play that because you're out of their range." And I thought, oh gosh, I don't know anything about ranges. So I went back to the book, and I did this and that. And as luck would have it, I did the arrangement. The producers were thrilled with it. I didn't know what to, when you become an experienced composer or arranger, you can hear in your head what it's going to sound like. But of course, I didn't have any point of reference really, because I hadn't done it before. But it worked out wonderfully well with Harry Rabinowitz's help, because he conducted the orchestra for that recording, and I sat in the booth with the producers, and I was saying, "Wow, that's my music! Wow!" I was very impressed. And it turned out incredibly well, as possibly I mean, it won awards, and won the Ivor Novello Award for Best Television Theme of the Times, 1972, was it? Three, something like that. And that opened all possible doors for me, actually, because it just became kind of iconic, I suppose, that particular theme, the Black Beauty theme. And it's still used, today, 40 odd years later. And it also gave me the confidence to go on. But as I said, once you get your foot in the door, unless you're a fool, you should take advantage of it, which I did. I was in demand, actually, mostly for television series about horses. Quite ridiculous. But that was the start of my career, really, as a composer for television.
Great to get the story behind it, because like you say, the theme to Black Beauty is iconic. It's still used, and beyond it, that piece of music has been used in other things. And I was going to ask you, obviously, when you do these orchestrations and these compositions, is it a case of once you've recorded it, that's it? Or do you ever kind of go back to it, or are you ever kind of called to it again,
Yes, yes and no. I mean, doing the series is like doing any long-running television series. With Black Beauty, we did 52 episodes, and each episode, although they were only half-hour shows in those days, had to have a specially composed or orchestrated an arrangement. Invariably, the director or producer said, "Oh, let's have more of the theme. Can't you work the theme into the background music?" And blah 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 blah. So I did. Over a period of time, I would do that. I'd try and use the theme as best as I could within the dramatized music that was required for certain scenes within that half-hour episode. So I put the theme in here and there, and I was able to. I had no desire, funnily enough, to rescore the title music. I thought I was lucky because what I did, first off, seemed to work on all levels. Everybody was happy with it, and it did the trick. And when they cut the film, the opening title film, to the music, not the other way around. In other words, what I'm saying is that if it had been a question of they've already got the film cut and edited, then I would have had to sort of fitted the music to whatever I saw on the screen. But in this instance, they wanted the theme first, and then cut the film around that music. But I never felt it wouldn't have been better if I'd done it another way. I mean, as it happens, last year I had a sort of an idea about doing a jazz version of the theme, which is a bit bizarre in a way, because I've just done an album, a sort of jazz-ish album, playing the jazz piano with a wonderful bass player called Dave Olney and a drummer called Mike Smith, who's one of the great session drummers in the country, and a girl singer who's absolutely wonderful, called Sarah Eden, that's spelled Eyden, Eden, who I sort of met on a cruise a couple of years ago. I was performing on a cruise, and she was in another part of the theatre on board ship. And she's a really good singer, knows all the songs. Anyway, we got together and we've done an album together, just her and me with the trio of original songs of mine. But I had this feeling when we were talking about doing other stuff, I said, let's try doing the Black Beauty theme as a jazz. I always had a feeling it might kind of work as a jazz instrumental, but with her doing sort of oohs and ahs, and she's got an incredible range, this girl. And it was because the tune kind of works in different guises, really, the theme. I mean, when you write something, I've written hundreds and hundreds, thousands, I suppose, of tunes and songs and whatever over the years, but I'm always amazed when you try things in a different form. I'm not saying that the Black Beauty theme would work as a waltz, but it might do. I don't know. I've never tried it. But to do it as a jazzer was really good, and it came out sort of as a single on the beginning of this year, actually. And it's had a bit of play. People listen to it and say, some people say, "Oh, it's great what you've done." Others say, "How could you this desecration, that wonderful theme, you ruined it." So people, I don't care really much, but I don't. To answer your question, I don't kind of get the feeling that I want to particularly revisit it, as it were, musically anyway, because I think what it did at the time worked, and it still works today. As you said, it gets picked up by all manner of things. I mean, usually when it's a Grand National or something, they're doing a programme on, and I hear my little theme in the background. Oh, that's another Bob and the Kitty, you know. But themes, tunes are tunes are tunes. I mean, I'm touching wood as I speak to you, but I've never seemed to have had a problem coming up with a theme, or I never have had what I possibly might be called writer's block when I'm asked to create something musically. I can always kind of grab something out of thin air. And obviously it helps if you're writing as a composer, writing something specifically for a project, be it a film or a television show or a theatre show or a song for a singer, but in a dramatic sequence. Rather, I'm not one of these people who can sit, think, oh, I've got an inspiration in the middle of the night, I want to write a piece of music. I have to have something in mind before I can actually begin to start composing something. But so far, so good. I haven't really had a great problem with coming up with anything.
No, well, occasionally in your work for television, you've sometimes had themes with words in them. Have you found that tricky, along with just the orchestration?
No, I haven't actually, because my first, I suppose, prior to writing instrumental music, I loved writing songs. I'm not a lyricist myself, or I've written a couple of things over the years, but I really enjoy working with. See, there's two different things. When you're writing in isolation, i.e. for a television theme or a piece of instrumental music, you're left to your own devices usually. If you're doing television, I did a series called Lovejoy as well. That went on for, worked out 82 episodes of Lovejoy, which is a hell of a lot of music, because that's spaced over 6 years. Because again, they were an hour-long show, 55-minute shows or something, but they required a different setting each week. I mean, it was the same. Obviously, it was Ian McShane as Lovejoy in a situation in his antique business and all that stuff. And there was a bit of drama, a bit of comedy, there was a bit of everything. But so with that, I found it, because it kind of went on and on, they said, the producers were saying, let's have, you work the theme in a bit more. And it drove me mad, to be honest, because after a bit, I thought the theme was all right, worked very well. But after years of doing this thing, so I started, and they seemed to be quite happy, more or less, with what sound that the orchestra made. I would, for one season, which season was usually about 12 episodes, I think, I would do it with a string quartet and some woodwinds. And then another season I did with a sort of small jazz ensemble with some horns and woodwinds. And each time, just to ring the changes for my own benefit, my own sanity, really, because you do get kind of locked in, and you're looking at a picture of Ian McShane every week for weeks on end and trying to come up with, yet another. I mean, it's an interesting process, writing for television, writing for film. It's the same thing, really. Just that film has much bigger budgets and you've got, much more to play with. But to see a piece of film with sound effects but no music, then you're asked to create another kind of layer, if you like. I find that kind of fascinating, because you can absolutely undermine the film, but if you get it wrong musically, if you don't get the mood right, you can sort of destroy what the creative people have been doing. It's a very powerful medium, as you're aware, and I like that aspect of it. I like, you can see a film with nothing and then add your two penneth, and it can often bring it to life, which is a nice feeling. The trouble now, of course, not that I've been involved in any major films at all. I never quite got into that, but in the old days, I was talking about Black Beauty, which is 40 odd years ago. You didn't know what was going to happen when you went to the studio with your music. You hadn't heard it before. You saw the film in the studio where all the musicians are facing you, and as if you're conducting, you're facing the film. And the first time anybody has heard anything is when you bring the baton up, and then they had something called a wipe on the film screen that you have to watch if you're conducting. It's like a white line that runs down the middle of the screen, and when it hits the left hand side of the screen is your time to start your music cue. And there were no such things as click tracks in those days. I mean, the only time I would see a Black Beauty episode was in the cutting room at the television station, where you saw it on something called a moviola, which was like a very small television screen. It wasn't even that; it was tiny. You had the opportunity to see the film maybe twice, and then had to go home and try and remember what you'd seen by dint of having lots of details of timings and trying to work out tempo. So I was armed usually with a metronome and a stopwatch to work, and it helped because you learned from day one how to change. Initially it was this wonderful man Harry Rabinowitz who conducted all my Black Beauty episodes, but it was wonderful to actually see the technique involved. But as as the progress in technology, it became easier and easier and easier. Now you see everything. You work it out with your click track. You work it out at home in the big films, because they can't, when they're paying hundreds of thousands of pounds for the London Symphony Orchestra or something. They can't afford to sort of have the orchestra there and then they start recording, and the producer says, "That's not what I thought it was going to be." And it's cost. I mean, I've been at sessions. I went to an Elmer Bernstein session at the George Martin Studios in Hampstead, and he had a huge orchestra, and it was a film called Scarlet Letter. It was made. I'm going back probably about 25 years ago, or maybe a little less, and they had this big orchestra, and I thought the music was sensational. I don't think the film was particularly good, but the music was sensational. And then I heard afterwards the guy who fixed the orchestra said, "Oh no, they've thrown that one out." And that's the second score they've recorded, which they decided they don't want. They ended up getting John Barry to do a full score again. So you're talking about millions of dollars spent. But nowadays, apparently, the producers insist on hearing what the composer has in mind before the orchestra comes in. They have to do a kind of dummy recording with synthesizers and all manner of electronic instruments to give the producers an idea of what the themes are and where this and that and the other thing before they'll say, "Yes, go ahead," because they don't want to risk losing countless thousands of dollars. So it's changed a bit, changed a lot really, but it is much, from that point of view, it's easier to sort of make sure you don't make a mess of it on the day, but it takes away that surprise element, which I used to love. I used to love watching something without music and then with, and that's just how wonderful it can be. I mean, the great example always for me, film music, is another of my heroes is John Williams, who, The Jaws is the classic, isn't it? Because the film The Jaws, you never actually saw the shark until about 3/4 of the way through the movie, but you were very aware of something appalling happening, because that sort of low cellos, the music that John Williams wrote, you see the sea and it's all calm, then you hear oh God, oh no, and it's fantastic. That's how effective it can be when it's done right. But on the other hand, you can kind of mess it up occasionally, I suppose.
I was going to ask you have, I think, already answered my question, but do you actually see any of the, or did you actually see, because we're talking about a few years ago, any of the productions prior to you writing any music? Did they actually have anything down on film to show you? or did they give their brief in another way?
Well, the brief was, as I said, accommodation really. You first of all given a script of the thing, and they said, yeah, we're shooting it at the moment. And you could kind of second guess more or less what the moods might be. And talking again, I'm sorry to refer back to Black Beauty because that's the first thing I did. But you could kind of use the horse is lame or something, or it's been taken away by some villains, and you think, oh yeah, there's a bit of low cellos there and a bit of percussion and in your head before you saw it. And then you see it, as I said, that in those days you just had, they cut the film together and you'd see it with the director in the cutting room, all gathered around this it's brilliant, but in those days it was a very rudimentary machine called a moviola, where you had to peer into this tiny screen and with a pencil, paper and some notes, and the editor would give you a breakdown of how many minutes or seconds that scene lasted, and then at a certain point within that scene, say at 35.7 seconds, the villain would jump out of the trees or something, so they want a big dramatic sting at that specific point. So you sort of try and make notes of all of this, and then work it out with the tempo. But you've actually seen the clip of film, and you've got to more or less try, so much more difficult as it was, and remember exactly what happened when, despite the fact you'd have the details in front of you, courtesy of the editor who'd got all the timings down. But you did actually have an opportunity of seeing the stuff before you actually wrote the music for it, albeit very briefly, and then. So when you get into the recording, they'd have the film on a big screen at the back of the studio, where you'd be able to watch everything and hopefully synchronize your downbeat with that particular specific sync point where something dramatic's likely to happen or not. So you did get a chance. It was difficult, it's tricky, but I love the fact that I've actually experienced that, whereas a lot of younger guys, I don't know why, but it just feels right that I've had the chance to see it in its earlier days, and that was good for me. But it's the same process in the end. But as I say, I think it's much easier because we spend weeks in the studios doing the music and just getting the click tracks and the tempo, and then lots of things are done in separate sessions these days. You get the strings in for one session, and then the brass in for another session, and then the choir on the next following week, and it's all it's layer after layer after layer. Whereas in the old days you had to do it then and there and hope you get it right.
On behalf of other composers out there that are kind of interested, because I know that back in the day a lot of actors that signed on to TV series and stuff, a lot of their contracts didn't actually feature home video because it wasn't a thing. And I wondered, with some of the your compositions being included in these programs that are released on DVD or even shown on TV, in some cases, do you still get royalties for sales of stuff, or is it kind of locked in?
No, you do. I mean, I'm lucky. Some actors, and I don't know, I don't know the situation. I know a lot of actors who were in long-running shows, and when they finished, they came up on the video or repeated years later. That actually don't get any residuals. Sort of signed away their life, as it were. But as a composer, I am protected, as other composers are, by the Performing Rights Society, which you've probably heard of. But their function is to collect on your behalf any royalties that are generated via overseas sales, or now with the internet, satellite television and all that stuff. things are on all the time. And for instance, this Lovejoy series I did a long time ago, at one stage, it keeps coming back about 3 times a day. It was on funny times of the day and night. And I thought I was going to be rich as a result. I thought, this is fantastic. But they've done, and God knows how it works, they do a kind of blanket buyout, some of these satellite stations, whereby X number of programs are sold for a minimal sum, and they can put them on as much as they want. It's one could argue it's a bit of a fiddle, really, because prior to that, I mean, when I was doing all these series and they were repeated, you'd get depending on what time of day and what channel, BBC One and ITV in the early days, guaranteed you get a proper, decent royalty for the number of times it's actually on the box. But as I say, as TV became much, much broader and wider through satellite television, all these funny stations, they kind of whittle it down to, I don't know exactly how it's done, to be honest. All I know from my point of view is that what I would have hoped might be a very, like a pension, if you like, through all these showings and repeats, was really not very exciting or disappointing, I suppose it would be. But you do, I mean, I do, for instance, anything that, like the Black Beauty, any of my television scenes, if they're played anywhere, not just on television, but on radio, or they use it for my things used for commercials occasionally, which is very good in terms of royalties, and or if it's used abroad, anywhere in the world, really, they have these. The Performing Rights Society have a sort of tie-up with other collection agencies throughout the world who monitor TV or radio or even live shows, and have to make a list of songs or pieces of music, performances, and then it's all done by computer. And one is surprised that things I've written years and years and years ago, forgotten about, and you get, might only be a couple of pounds or something, but you think, that's extraordinary. Somebody actually has gone to the trouble of actually, monitoring it, writing it down and sending it in, and it's put it all in a big computer, and you get a little check for it, or straight to the bank. It's so, but as I say, I don't think it's the same with actors. I don't think it's the same with screenwriters. It only seems to work, or has done for years, with musicians, with actually composers. From that point of view, it's been Performing Rights has been fantastic for me. I've been a member of it for about 50 years, but it's I used to be doing so much, and it was on all the time, and I was getting very well paid for my trouble. But it's obviously I don't do any I do virtually no television now. It's a whole different ball game. I mean, much younger people in the business, of course, naturally. And I kind of just live off my royalties a bit and do a little bit of writing, and I still enjoy what I'm doing. I just like composing anyway. I like being given something to write to, and I can sort of lose myself in it. It's a great. I feel very fortunate to have made a living. A pretty good living out of what I would have termed a hobby anyway, because I would have done it even if I was paid for it. I just enjoy the process so much.
With TV, is there a particular thing that you've done in that period of time that you're most proud of, or that you look back on with maybe the most fondly?
I've written about over 200, I suppose about 300 television themes or music for television over the years. I'm very fond of the Black Beauty theme for pretty obvious reasons, because it was my breakthrough in as a television composer, and also it got such recognition. I mean, as you said, use the word, I think I probably did as well. It's become a kind of iconic piece of television music. And so what surprises me is that people who, the younger element in who I don't even watch television or don't even watch television, but they all seem to know the Black Beauty theme, even, teenagers. And you wonder how and why. I mean, I know it's used for the odd commercial or for a theme for something else, but I felt obviously very, very proud of that, or if that's the right word. I'm very grateful to it because of what it does, and also I think it's a good piece of music. It's stood the test of time. Among other pieces of music in television, there's been a few different kinds of mood of music. It's funny, people say, "What's your favourite? What's your favourite?" And I don't really have a favourite. There are certain things that I've written that I'm almost ashamed of. To put it the other way, I won't even mention it. Well, I will actually. There's a series called a comedy series on Granada or something years ago called Bottle Boys. You won't have heard of, but
I have heard of that. Yes, that is regarded as one of the worst sitcoms anyway, isn't it?
yeah, well done. Yes, I was trying to keep it quiet. Yes, you're absolutely right. No, it was voted, I think, in a national newspaper as the worst sitcom ever produced on television. I've written the music for it. It was Robin Asquith. It was based on those Confessions of a Window Cleaner, all those rather kind of rude, raunchy
films of the early 70s. Yes,
that's right. Yeah, they did this series called Bottle Boys, and I wrote that as a song with a dear, wonderful friend of mine called sadly no longer, who'd also written songs for Bernard Critters, the Right Said Fred and Hole in the Ground, and a few of those. Miles Rudge was his name. He was a wonderful character. He's passed away. But he and I wrote a lot of songs together, some for theatre, but quite a bit of television theme. And I think, I can't remember, I think I got Joe Brown to sing it over the credits. I'm not sure now, but it's embarrassingly, it's sort of so corny and so awful. But and obviously, I don't think it generated more than 2p, I think, because it never got played. But as far as sort of being proud of I mean, Odd Things, I wrote a one-off piece of music for a drama the great television writer Jack Rosenthal wrote years ago. It was rather moving. It was a rather sort of serious piece of television drama. I wrote a theme for it. It was just a one-off, wasn't a series, and it's a sort of string quartet with a sort of featuring a solo violin. And it's an interesting piece of music because nobody would have heard it. Nobody knows about it. But I did it on I did an album of my television themes, and I put that on because I couldn't resist. And of course, nobody, there's something I think, if somebody said, "Oh, we know that theme you wrote," I can't even remember the name of it. I'll think of it in a minute, the name of the series, the one-off. And I thought, that's nice. It's because right out of my comfort zone. I never sort of wrote anything kind of like that before. But I can't think of one piece of music or song rock. I've written hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of songs because I like writing for the theatre as well as television. I like musical theatre. And as I was a singer in my early years, I always think of the voice when I'm writing songs. I have a singer in my head, whereas some composers, very eminent composers for theatre, for musicals, don't think in terms of how it would sound on certain phrases would sound, or certain vowel sounds would sound on the voice on a certain note in the octave. And I've always been aware of the voice. I love writing for voice, or anybody's voice really, and putting together a cluster of notes and whatever. I don't think I have a very, very favourite or something I'm more proud of than others. I love as I said, I love the process. And sometimes you think, yeah, that's really good. I like that. Or sometimes you think, I could have done better. But then you move on. There's no point stopping and saying, oh, I'm going to do that again. I invariably, if I'm writing under any kind of stress, i.e. against the clock, I write something and then I think, oh gosh, I'll try that again. That's not that. And you fiddle around and 3 or 4 different versions, but in almost always you come back to the first thoughts. The first thoughts are always right.
Yes. So that was. We've just talked about your television stuff at length. What else are you doing? What are you doing at the moment?
I'm sort of fiddling. I'm not involved in any big. I've got a book out. I don't know a memoir called Key Changes, which has had a very good reaction. I wrote it actually with Astrid. You spoke to Astrid not so long ago. She's the writer, but it's my story, my life, if you like, growing up. Through this other career, as I say, as a very young guy, being in music halls. It was then sort of twice nightly variety in the 1950s, touring the country with my brothers, and anecdotes and people I'd worked with, many famous people like Frank Sinatra and Judy Garland and Tony Bennett, and I've been on the stage with. And we wrote this, and it had a terrific reaction. Well, we published it ourselves, but that was 4 years ago. And we've found some more stuff. There have been a few things happened since then that we want to add to it. So we're in the process of revising it, I suppose, and adding some more. And we're going to republish it later this year. So I've been involved in that to quite a large extent, and also working with this this girl in the rhythm section that I mentioned before, Sarah Eden, and the two guys. We're doing a gig in London on October the 8th, 9th, a place called the Crazy Cocks in Piccadilly. It's a cabaret room, but we're really working on an act that we do together. She sings mostly. I sing with her a little bit, and we do a little bit of chat. And we're getting quite a few people to come in to see that with a view to doing more live appearances. See, she's very keen. She's much younger than me. She's Sarah, that is. She's terribly keen to do more and more and more live appearances. And I said, I'm too old. I did all that years and years and years ago. I love living where we're living now in Suffolk, and this is a lovely home, and we're near the sea, and I just want to sort of fiddle around in my studio and try out bits and pieces when I feel like it, and not be put under any pressure. And the idea about performing again, which is obviously what it would require, I think, oh gosh, do I need that? I mean, I do it just occasionally. I do live performances if asked, but I could do a lot more. But I'm have to face facts that I'm too old. It's true. I don't want to tour anymore. I've done it. Been there, done it. So I'm doing bits and pieces, and I'm writing a show, a musical for. There's a festival up here where we live in Suffolk called Ink, the Ink Festival. It's new work, new plays, new writers, new this, new that. And I think I persuaded them to commission me and a woman, lyricist and book writer called Mary Stewart David, who I've written lots and lots of stuff with, to write a show specifically for this Ink Festival, which is next year now. It's March, I think, of next year. And so I'm kind of occasionally dipping into that and doing the book and doing bits and pieces and revising things and coming up with ideas for songs for this stage show that I do with the girl. So long as I can do a bit, what I don't have to do, thankfully, anymore, is work to a clock, work to, be pushed into a situation where you've got to come up with something the following day, and Burn the Midnight Oil, which I did a lot of when I was doing lots of television and commercials. I did a lot of commercials in the 70s and 80s, jingles and things, and they always want the music the following day. So then they pay quite well, so you do it, don't you? Or you don't. So what I'm doing today, in answer to your question, is taking it pretty easy, but still very much keeping my hand in different things. I'd probably get bored if I was doing the same thing all the time, but so long as it's to do with music, and I've got my own studio and I can kind of create orchestra sounds, and my son Alex is very knowledgeable musically. He's a good musician, actually, although he doesn't do that for a living. But so we sort of treat it a bit like a hobby, but you get great satisfaction out of it if you the results are pretty good. That's more or less what I'm doing.
Well, it's great to hear about all the stuff you're doing, and I do wish you the very best for your future projects. Denis King, thank you so much for coming on the Old Time Review podcast today to talk to me, because this has been in the plan for a while, and I'm glad to finally have got the opportunity to have spoken to you. Thank you. Thank you very much for listening to the Old Time Review podcast. Please do remember to subscribe to us on your favourite podcast provider. Also check out our website at www.oldtimereview.co.uk. This is Jamie Dyer speaking for the Old Time Review podcast.